Hey everybody, Dan Kent here. It's been so long since I've done a Dan Kent Can Read that I don't even remember what number I'm on. I'll have to look that up. But this week, I want to do a Dan Kent Can Read episode on the book Love and Quasars, an astrophysicist reconciles faith and science by my friend Paul Wallace. And this book came out in 2019, around the same time as my book Confident Humility came out, and we both shared a publisher at Fortress Press. We both shared an editor, Tony Jones, and so I figured, well, I gotta give this a look. And so in 2019 I read it, and I probably read about 50 books in 2019, and I enjoyed this one the most. It's got everything. It's got stories, it's got insights, it's got profundity, it's got humor, it's got movie quotes. I mean, it really does. It has. In fact, I remember just like reading through it and I was sitting at a restaurant eating fries, and just totally, I felt like I was having a conversation at the table with Paul Wallace. And it's got a very kind of conversational tone. Like it's the type of writing where it feels like you're hanging out with the author, and that's not easy to achieve. That takes a lot of work to produce that kind of writing. But so the writing itself is great. It's entertaining, but it's also, there's a lot of profundity in here, and there's a lot of depth. And it's interesting because, when I was a kid, I loved getting into the science classes. When we got to the point where we would get the microscopes and we would look into like some pond water and you could see all the microorganisms. And I remember one time, this is kind of horrifying and disgusting from a person who is afraid of spiders, but we had this dead spider, and we put this dead spider under the microscope, and you can see in the leg of the spider there was a microorganism inside of there. And you just get this sense that, well, maybe if I zoom in even more, I can find an even smaller microorganism inside of that microorganism. But it doesn't really work that way. It just sort of gets blurry, and you get these little crunching, squishy noises as you turn the microscope down more and more and more. And likewise with space, when I was 11, I got a telescope for Christmas, and I just had this idea that, I just loved it because I went through this space kick where I learned all the planets, and I learned about constellations, and it baffled me that, Earth is so small. And as a kid, you grow up, you think this is everything is right here, but no, it's hardly anything here. And you look out into space, and it just goes on and on, and there are so many planets way bigger than Earth even out there. And so when I got this telescope, I thought, man, I'm gonna find things out there that things like that you see in Star Wars and Star Trek. And so I got my telescope and I aimed it at Mars, and I was thinking, if I zoom in enough, I'll be able to see, the kind of the nuances of Mars's atmosphere. And maybe if I could go it even further than that, I might be able to, like I said, I was 11, but I was thinking, well, maybe I could eventually find a civilization through my telescope. It's like a $50 telescope. But of course, as you know, it doesn't take long to realize telescopes are not as powerful, especially at that $50 level, as you might hope. And really, when I pointed it at Mars and I adjusted the zoom knob, I basically just got a fuzzy looking node of rice, is what it looked like, slightly reddish node of rice. But that's the thing with Paul Wallace, is I think he was driven by similar kind of impulses, because this guy, he got a PhD in experimental nuclear physics. So we're talking like the world of the tiny, tiny, impossible to see level of tininess. But then also he's an astrophysicist, so he's into the universe as a whole, and the largeness and the professional study of that largeness. But not only is he an astrophysicist who has a PhD in experimental nuclear physics, but he also has an MDiv. So this guy has the science, he's got the theology, and that's what this book is about: is how do you how do you reconcile faith and science, and how do you reconcile love and quasars? And it's a beautiful book, and he uses this relationship model in there. What if science and faith were people, and you are at a party and you say, you introduce the two and you say, okay, science, this is faith, faith, this is science, and now how are these two people going to get along? And he examines these four different sort of potential relationships that these two people, faith and science, might have. And so ultimately what he proposes is that faith and science should have a good relationship, even to the extent that you could say faith and science should be wed. They should be intimately related in a believer's mind. Really, I think the book and his kind of approach is summarized really well. This is at the end of chapter 5. He says this on page 42. He says, as a believer, your faith can expand until it is large enough to encompass science, and yet humble enough to not restrict science. By allowing science to remain full size, faith can transform science into a sacred task, and the cosmos itself gets transformed into a cathedral. I love that quote, because a lot of times what happens with faith is you embrace science, but you put all of these special constraints around it because we don't want science to get out of hand and threaten our faith. And so you put all these constraints. But what Wallace says, and he argues very effectively, is that you can rather just let your faith expand so that it can encompass a full-sized science. And really, I think that's our only hope as believers, as people, to have any type of coherent, integrated kind of faith and science in our lives. There's one more kind of note that he gives that really kind of tickles one of my own kind of pet peeves, and he talks about this on page 78. He says, and he talks about, whether or not we can really know anything about God. And he acknowledges mystery, but he says, yes, we can know things about God. In fact, he says we have to be able to. He says this, yes, God is a mystery, and we see through a glass darkly. But it is central to Christianity that God is revealed in what is seen and what is known. And then he quotes from the Bible saying that the heavens are telling of the glory of God. And the psalmist writes, day to day, the heavens pour forth speech, and night to night, the heavens declare knowledge of God. And in Romans, Paul says that ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things that God has made. I just think that is one of my kind of pet issues, because I think it's so important to, even though, there's a lot of mystery in God, there has to be something that is knowable about God. In fact, you can't really say that the Bible is revelation if nothing is actually revealed. And so if God is pure mystery, then we have no revelation. If God is pure mystery, then we can't learn anything about God through creation. And so I agree with him that it is central to the faith. But he's got tons of great stories in here. I hope you read this book, because it's just an enjoyable book to read, especially if you're interested in faith and science. And definitely check out the story about Planet George. I didn't know about that. It's a very funny kind of historical story. But Paul, man, great book. And I wanted to do this Dan Kent Can Read episode earlier, but life is busy. But he's got another book out, which maybe I'll do a Dan Kent Can Read about that as well. Thanks, everybody. And I should have hopefully more of these coming out soon.